You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. Today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And of course, our Locked On Hawks Postcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So first off, welcome back, guys. But it wasn't the welcome that we wanted. Except it's still trade day. So we'll talk about that. And we're going to take a look ahead because, yes, the Hawks have 27 games left, but the next 3 are so critical. But first, we'll download on our takes from this Hawks Magic game that saw the Hawks fall at home 114-108. And Tate, you said it was a classic game of physicality versus pace.
For sure, it was. And listen, I knew that that's something that it could potentially come down to. They just played this team, game before last, and kind of seeing the way that went on the road. I just knew that Orlando, being one of those teams that doesn't particularly shoot it well, they always kind of want to play that bump and bruise kind of game, bull in a China shop, or I guess just kind of bully ball type of game. You almost can't blame them as bad as they shoot it. I think the worst in the league, I think from 3, which I believe was one of my keys to victory, where it was almost like you to a degree, like, yes, you do still want to be present. You want to still contest and close out or what have you on the couple shooters that they do have. But you almost want to dare them to shoot to a degree, but you had to be really strong in the front court, which for the most part, in a lot of ways, Atlanta was, especially considering the fact that they aren't trending in the right direction, but for such a long time throughout the duration of the season, they were one of the best teams in terms of points in the paint scoring. They were kind of overwhelmed a little bit by Orlando in that department on tonight. That wasn't something that I really anticipated, but because of the fact that they are such a team that is so strong, they're young, they're very physical, they like to beat you up on the boards and things of that nature. What the determining factor was for this game, to me, I think when you saw Atlanta not only get out to a 19-point lead, but also in the first quarter, where I believe that they probably had their strongest quarter leading up to the fourth, was the fact that in the first they got out and run. They got out and had a chance to kind of flex their muscles in the pace department, kind of gotten away from that a little bit in the second and third quarter, where it just looks like Orlando started stepping their defense up a little bit more and tried to punk Atlanta. And obviously in the fourth quarter, they just kind of took the gloves off and let it go.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that trend, especially when you think about the strong first quarter that the Hawks had, where literally they almost doubled. They were on their way to doubling the output of the Magic, outscored them 31-21. But then it was the very flip of that in that second quarter. So as we always talk about the third quarter being pesky, I think the second quarter was kind of pesky for the Hawks tonight. And although they closed the gap a little bit in that third quarter, they just didn't close the gap enough. And it's kind of hard when you go into the fourth quarter and you find yourself in the bonus 3 minutes into the quarter. I mean, you're almost, especially in a game that's being called so tight, like this game was called, you're really almost destined to fail unless you can get the 3 ball to fall like it was falling early, and unless you can get back into your run. And for me, it just seemed like that fourth quarter was out of rhythm. And to your point, a lot of times when teams come up and start playing that bully ball early, you may get your way early, but that starts to wear you down by the fourth quarter.
Yes, it does.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
For me, I think that the referees played some bully ball tonight. That's what I felt like, because I mean, DeShaun, we can go an entire week without talking about 11 technicals being called in a week of basketball. How in the world were 11 technicals called in one game? And it would have been 12, but I think they were almost tired of their own ticky-tack. So they ended up with 11 because there was almost one in the fourth quarter that they decided not to call on Trae, which was a good thing. But ultimately, I do think when a game begins to tighten up like this game did, yes, the Hawks had a 19-point lead at one time. Yes, the Magic had an 11-point lead at one time. But when this game really, really started getting tight, I felt like that's when you were going to see where that kind of officiating was going to be a challenge, because now you're really kind of leaving the game up to the charity stripe. And I don't mind if players are aggressive and they're taking it inside and going in the paint, and then they're able to possibly get an and one or at least get to the free throw line. But it just seemed like the ticky-tack fouls that got the Magic 38 free throws. 38. The only saving grace for the Hawks, because they only got 28, but the only saving grace was that, like you said, the Magic can't shoot crap from anywhere, including the free throw line. So they only shot 68% from the free throw line. That was the saving grace that kept the Hawks in this game this long. But I'll tell you what, I cannot wait to see the report from Jared. I cannot wait to see the report from Secaucus, because none of this makes sense to me. And I just really feel like we're going to get a report later on that says that wasn't a foul, that wasn't a foul, that wasn't a foul, because there's no way 11 technicals makes sense unless you can make it make sense.
Well, no, I definitely can't. And listen, I feel like you've been taking a peek inside of the answer key, because I had it written down here: questionable officiating. And I really wanted to go to that. And I know that it's not a lovely narrative, especially when it results in a Hawks loss. But I think that, to be honest with you, I think that it was just really bad officiating on both sides for both teams. The ticky-tack fouls, all of those different things, and just I mean, I don't know. I am typically the person that says I'm okay with it as long as you're being consistent. If you're going to be holding the whistles in the first half, hold them in the second. If you're going to be blowing it for every little last thing in the first half, do it in the second. Well, they did exactly that. So I guess they were listening to me. I don't really love the idea of just blowing whistles. It's basketball, okay?
Yeah.
We're already having conversations about league being watered down and having issues with ratings, amongst other things. I just don't think that it was a good look for the NBA tonight.
Yeah, and agreeing with you, by the way, trying to do things like potentially reducing the time for each quarter from 12 minutes to 10 minutes, because the average play time start to finish has been extended, I think, by 6 minutes this year.
Yes.
But when you're doing things like this, calling 38, 28, let me do some quick math, 66 free throw opportunities in one game. I mean, do you really think that was going to be a good look? You really think that that was going to be what helped the pace of this game? It's just like you said, this was a physicality versus pace game, but who, and that goes for Orlando or Atlanta, who can get some pace when every time they're trying to push the ball, woo, woo, woo. If I had a whistle, I'd be blowing it, because that's what it felt like. I mean, geez, I just, that ticks me off when you're in effect inserting yourself a little too much into the game and dictating how it was going to come out. Now, don't get me wrong. The Hawks did their part in losing this game as well.
Oh, for sure.
A team like the Hawks that had really prided itself on rebounding, and you look at the defensive side of the ball, most importantly, because that meant that they were limited in their second chance opportunities, and they got out rebounded, and not just out rebounded because the numbers ended up being close, but there were some critical moments, DeShaun, late in the game where had the Hawks had second chance opportunities, we might be talking about a W instead of an L. So I just really want to see them kind of get back to basics. And I know it's hard because Orlando's a big team physically, but we've seen Trae Young, we've seen Dyson Daniels, we've seen those guys get in there and bang away for free throws, because sometimes in a close game like this, that's just critical. That's just absolutely critical. But speaking of Trae, you know what? He might not have had that banging on the inside. He might not have had those sneaky rebounds that he's starting to be known for with this Hawks team, but it was still Trae Day. We'll talk about that in the and one. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, You can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback like the one the Hawks almost had tonight, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. And people who love using FanDuel's live betting feature say they do because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. So whether you're backing a team for a late game rally, again, like we almost saw tonight, or picking a player to hit a clutch three, which we know Trae is more than capable of, never feel like you missed a chance because the app is easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner, sports betting partner of the NBA. So, DeShaun, it's so good to see you. I hadn't seen you on my camera in a minute.
I feel like it's been forever.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of exciting to have full games, like a full 48, seeing the NBA back in action tonight, seeing Trae Young and the Hawks back in action tonight. And, we always talk about like angry Trae, who seems to go off every time he gets snubbed for All-Star. But I don't think people realize that he also really has an uptick, typically has an uptick post All-Star. So despite the loss tonight, can a 38-point, 6 assist type of game give you optimism about what we'll see from Trae and maybe seeing a peak of what he can do to help this team to, I would say, stay at the top of the play-in?
I believe so. We know that it's going to take more than just him. I think some help from
Yeah.
Zaccharie Risacher after Jalen Johnson has gone down, and give him credit because he stepped up in some ways, and he hasn't been the only one. Obviously, they're still trying to develop and establish some chemistry with the 3 new guys between Niang and Mann and Levert and those guys. So I think it's going to take some time. But I mean, it shouldn't probably be any surprise to what, I think we've kind of gotten spoiled in some ways by some of the things that Trae Young has been able to do, just based off of the simple fact that it's just like another night for Trae Young kind of thing. And I think that, one of the main things is not letting that snub kind of get to him. When you go back and kind of look at some of his numbers that he has had, I mean, just in the month of February alone, I promise I'll go through this quickly: 34-17, 34-9, 32-12, 24-7, 35-14, 19-8, and 13-19, and a big game on tonight. That just lets you know that it's just Trae being in Trae form. Going to be important for him to kind of continue this. Kind of weird that it kind of seems like we've kind of gotten away from this weird Trae that we weren't used to seeing at the beginning of the season, where he was so passive and he was just seemed so calculated about every little thing, and it was just I don't know the word I'm really looking for, but it just didn't seem really like Trae. And then now this is more like the Trae that we're used to seeing. But and I think he could afford to be that person at that point in time because he had Jalen Johnson that helped him out a lot too. But I'll say enough to say that I think that it is good that he can be either one of these players and it still end up resulting in a win. Now, obviously, that wasn't the case on tonight, but still competing at a high level, while still, the maturation process within his game, I think, has shown. And so sometimes when you are learning and taking on this, not necessarily new role, but with new players, it just feels like it's a lot of turnover, a never-ending revolving door of teammates that you really don't know what you're going to have and on what night. You don't know if Vit Krejci going to start. You don't know if Mohamed Gay is going to start. I think he's done himself a fine job. And honestly, that's one of the bigger reasons behind why I think he is unquestionable. Should have been a solid pick for the All-Stars, because I don't know many number one options and guys that got the keys to the city that would be able to handle and balance such things.
Yeah, because we battled and debated on this show who was number 2, who was number 3. And sometimes we took Jalen Johnson out of the equation just to kind of see who else would be there. And sometimes it was DeAndre Hunter. Of course, now he's gone, and you have to wonder who's going to be that person. But yeah, I think you're right. 38 points and 6 assists is not only more like the Trae we're accustomed to seeing, but it's like the Trae that might have to show up until he knows which one of these guys, 1, 2, or all of them, can I trust to really be contributors.
That's
so
right.
Yeah, I think that when you're dealing with what he's dealt with, I mean, the carousel is unbelievable. It's not even the carousel that started at the trade deadline. That carousel started before that, with players coming up from the G League and him having to figure out how to play with them one night, and the next night they might not be there. So yeah, I'm optimistic as well about the 38 points, and hopefully the 6 assists will go back to the double-double like we're accustomed to. But I truly think a part of that was just the physicality that the Magic had, and the fact that he just was not able to get out and run and really run that Hawks offense with flow like you wanted to. But speaking of All-Star Weekend, Zaccharie Risacher, I thought he had a good showing in the Bay Area. But what really made me think about him and his performance and what it means to the Hawks is the fact that they can get this out of him from the second half. Their number one pick is really starting to show up. Like tonight, it wasn't just about 11 points and 12 rebounds. It was about some critical 3-point shots that he made early on. And it's about the hustle and the effort that just continues to grow every night. That said, there's a number one overall pick that can't be counted on, and that's for the San Antonio Spurs. We found out that that team, which is also kind of battling to get into the play-in in the Western Conference, will be without Victor Wembanyama. He's down for the season, or at least they've called him pretty much down for the season with a blood clot in his shoulder. And it just made me think, seeing Zach back in action and pretty much being healthy this entire season so far, pretty much, and hopefully the rest of the season, is definitely something the Hawks have to be grateful for their number one pick.
One of the things I think that, we kind of forget to mention sometimes, and we kind of, I guess, not necessarily take for granted, but just kind of forget about inevitably, is that when we were just talking a second ago about how much, the carousel and the turnover of roster and things of that nature, we kind of forget that there is another guy who's a starter who he's not used to, really playing with like that, at least not for a whole season anyway. It's only been a half a season. That is Zaccharie Risacher. We kind of automatically, just forget about grouping him in amongst new guys in the Hawks uniform this year. So I think that is another extra piece that Trae does have to find some balance to. But I think that Zaccharie Risacher, while he maybe didn't appear to shoot it very well on tonight, definitely has done well for himself, because he's certainly been one of those guys that has, I'll just say, he has that underappreciated effort sometimes.
Yes.
While he may not necessarily shoot it well, he's always doing a good job rebounding. I seen him doing that a couple nights on tonight, where he kind of had some tie-ups and what have you. Got about 2 or 3 rebounds in a row. Maybe he missed a shot in order to get those rebounds, but kind of stuck with it, stayed after it. And there wasn't an Atlanta Hawk player around in uniform, and he was still going after it. And he's still, I mean, look at me, the guy who's 40 years old, 150 pounds, talking about somebody being light in the behind. But we know that he still has that strength that he kind of has to put on. He has that motor. He has that ability to be kind of active around the rim, his energy. We talk so much about Dyson Daniels and his energy, kind of being something that is that is easy to is infectious. Correct. I think you can say that the same thing in some ways about this young kid who's just kind of getting over here, still kind of learning how to play, but still doing himself a fine job as well. So I definitely want to give some credit. What he's done at All-Star Weekend, I mean, I think that's big, really good for him. He talked about it being a dream come true for him. And I thought that was just really awesome. Being number one pick comes with a whole lot of pressure that none of us will really be able to understand. There's some people who just, I mean, I don't think could have done nearly, or didn't do, who were number one picks, that didn't do as well as he did during All-Star Weekend. So I definitely want to give him his credit, because he came and showed out and certainly represented for the ATL.
Oh, yeah, he most definitely did. And one thing that you mentioned, he didn't have the best shooting night, still got 11 points, still got the boards, but it's that energy and what you don't see in the box score that's pretty impressive to me as well. And it's in the box score, and it's not in the box score all at the same time, because we look at plus minus, and when we see a +7, we know what that means. That tells you, that to me is also important, because sometimes I do look beyond just the numbers and I want to see what the plus minus is for a player, because that says, hey, Zaccharie Risacher played 24 minutes and whenever he was in the game, it was a plus for the Hawks. And we see that for him more often than not. So again, very, very encouraging. And really, I think Hawks Nation just needs to be grateful that this has been a rookie that for the most part has been healthy. And of course, we wish Victor Wembanyama well in the San Antonio Spurs organization, because I can't imagine getting that kind of news, because blood clots are extremely tricky. They can travel really, really fast and they can do some damage. So certainly wish him well.
With Victor Wembanyama, I guess now officially or unofficially, officially being done for the season. Yes. And I just kind of had a feeling that for whatever reason, as great as Dyson Daniels has been on the defensive side of the ball, they were going to find some way, somehow, to give it to Victor Wembanyama. He is now disqualified from being able to win such awards. Does that kind of pretty much put the exclamation point on, as of right now today, Dyson Daniels? Would you agree, being the NBA's winning the Defensive Player of the Year award?
I think he can be in the conversation. I think we know that, unfortunately, we saw it for All-Star. A lot of times it's dictated by the team that's winning and winning consistently. Record. And unfortunately, the Hawks kind of aren't in that space. You're hearing more about Jaren Jackson, who's now the odds-on favorite, Evan Mobley right behind him. And so, so those are actually the two who are kind of neck and neck. I kind of feel like it should be Jaren Jackson Jr. because he's been right there every season in that conversation. And I think he's taken another step this year. But the reason I say it probably won't be Dyson Daniels, could be, should be, but probably won't be, is because unfortunately he plays for a team where the Hawks are kind of in the middle, just kind of lingering at the play-in level, whereas the Memphis Grizzlies have a legitimate chance to actually contend to come out of the Western Conference number one. So when you're on that team, you're probably going to get a little bit more consideration. And obviously, same thing with an Evan Mobley. Like, you're going to get consideration because your team in the Cleveland Cavaliers, if they haven't been at the top of the Eastern Conference, which they have for most of the season, they've been at the top of the association, period. That's correct. I think that's probably why that they're going to get the nod. But ultimately, you better hope Dyson Daniels is playing like he's in the conversation, because the next 3 games and these last 27, so critical for the Hawks. We'll talk about it on the other side. So, DeShaun, we got ourselves a little bit of an intriguing stretch here for the Hawks, where they came into this game in 8th place in the East, a spot behind the Magic, of course, who now have that game and a half over the Hawks after tonight's loss. But you still have 27 games left. And when you kind of look at and let's just look at the 27 as a whole, and then we'll kind of bring it back to the next 3. What do you feel like you need to see from the Hawks, that primary focus for them, so that they can continue to make that all-star push? That postseason push. I'm still going to say postseason push for the play-in, because I think that they've got a long road ahead of them to try to get to 6. But if they're in the 8th spot right now, at least maybe get to 7, and maybe we can have some conversation about hosting some games. But what would that look like for you the last 27 games?
Well, I think the main thing is they can't afford to turn the ball over. They definitely have to match the energy to a degree, but just preparing for some of these defenses that's going to be thrown their way. We know that the Atlanta Hawks, it's no secret that they're not the most talented team in the NBA, but I do love the way that they compete. So just continue to keep their foot on the gas. You can't afford, for the first quarter to look different than the way the second quarter looked tonight, different from the third quarter looked tonight, which was, by the time you look up at the fourth quarter, it feels like the game is almost over with. So I think the main thing is, as you get ready to prepare for the teams that you have in front of you, the game around this time of the year starts becoming more possession by possession. True. It starts to slow down some, more half court offense, more half court limitations in our offenses, things of that nature. There isn't as much run and gun up and down the floor, and that doesn't play into the hands of benefits for the Atlanta Hawks because they're one of the top teams in terms of pace. We've seen what defensive teams that they have coming up. We always talk about Miami and their defense with the way that they have their culture and everything else, the way they always find a way to defend Trae. We've seen it in tonight's game where Orlando's trying to find the blueprint to just say, hey, let's play some bully ball. We're not a great shooting team, but if we can go out there and get stops against these guys, then, we might be able to have ourselves a chance at winning. Detroit has kind of always created themselves a similar culture where they've always kind of hung their hat on their defense as well. So I think that Atlanta has to certainly do a better job at just being efficient. Every night is not, we know that they're not a great 3-point shooting team, but as long as you have ball protection and being able to hit your wide open shots when you do have those opportunities at 3, but certainly being efficient around the rim and continue to kind of beat guys up in the paint and make your money that way, the easier way, the smarter, think smarter, not harder. I think they're giving themselves a good chance to be a real player, at least going into, a play-in spot.
Yeah, and for me, it's this. Kobe Buffkin, December 18th, missed the rest of the season, undergo surgery to address right shoulder instability. Jalen Johnson, January 29th, Johnson suffered a torn labrum in his left shoulder, will miss the rest of the season. Beat Krejci out. The Hawks announced Wednesday he'll be reevaluated in 3 to 4 weeks. That news came out on February 12th. Same day, we find out Larry Nance Jr. will have has a non-displaced fracture in his right knee, reevaluated. He'll be reevaluated in about 5 weeks because that news came out last week. Your best ability is your availability. So for me, in order for the Hawks to stay at the top of the play-in, the Hawks have to stay healthy. And I am not saying that these guys put themselves in position to get injured. But what I am saying is that's the hope you have to have. The optimism you have to have is that everybody that you're seeing on that roster right now will actually be able to play at a high level for these next 27 games. And they'll play at a high level because they'll actually be available to play.
Let me ask you this question, Tenitra, and I kind of teased it for you earlier. If we want to do it for a different episode, that's fine. But I did want to have some not only for you to think about, but maybe even some for some of our listeners. Let's just say, obviously, outside of Jalen Johnson, that everybody else, for the most part, relatively healthy. Who do you envision in the event that we assume that we're looking at a Clint or Onyeka in the starting lineup? Obviously, Trae, Dyson Daniels, and Zaccharie Risacher. We've seen so many different moving pieces between who that fifth person would be in the starting lineup. Who is that person? We putting Coach Tenitra on the spot, putting on her coaching hat. Who would that player be for you that you think you would put in that particular spot?
In the 5?
As the fifth person.
Okay, so in the 5. I am going to tell you that if you want to know the answer to that, you need to come back for the next game against the Pistons because unfortunately we don't have enough time to talk about Onyeka Okongwu, Mohamed Gay, and Clint Capella. Because that's really kind of your triumvirate, if you will, where the decisions have to be made and you have to look at the next 27 games and kind of see how they go to determine things. And it may be determining on a game-by-game basis. Like, I don't know that even Quinn Snyder necessarily has the answer to the question.
As a consistent person, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think he quite has the answer to the question yet. And I'm still intrigued. And this is another reason I want you guys to come back post-game Hawks Pistons, because I'm wondering, DeShaun, now that Clint Capella is active again, hasn't been active in 3 weeks, if we're going to get any information as to what happened there, and if that can give us any guidance on what the Hawks think will be their number 5, and therefore it might dictate who you and I think.
I can't wait to talk about this. I can't wait for this one. Sunday night, people. Sunday night.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting because you know how it goes, DeShaun. The Hawks may not tell us what happened in the last 3 weeks. But now that he's active again, I wouldn't be surprised if a report comes out somewhere between now and Sunday that gives us a little bit more insight into what happened. Because remember, he was active today, but he only played 18 minutes. That's why I'm going to hold that thought. DeShaun is going to hold that thought because I got a feeling we're going to have more meat on that bone come Sunday. Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. Of course, this is a critical game Sunday because the Hawks are trying to get a split of the season series with the Detroit Pistons. You don't want to miss it. See you next time.